Eleanor Vance traced the cool steel of her dental probe, another mind-numbing afternoon dissolving into the monotonous whir of the ultrasonic scaler, when her phone buzzed with her father's aggressively cheerful ringtone. "Liam's wedding is next week, darling," Richard's voice purred, saccharine sweet. "Mail's been absolutely dreadful. I hear you never received your invitation?" A familiar cold dread tightened in Eleanor's chest, a knot formed from years of being the responsible but perpetually overlooked daughter in the Vance family's perfect tableau. The casual dismissal of such a significant event, coupled with the glaring absence of any prior notice, screamed not of postal error, but a calculated, deliberate slight, signaling the prelude to yet another family charade. Eleanor Vance meticulously polished the patient's molars, the monotonous whir of the scaler a familiar drone against the backdrop of her gnawing exhaustion. Another Tuesday, another endless stream of mouths, each one blurring into the last. As a dental hygienist, her hands were skilled, her demeanor patient, but inside, a deep weariness settled in her bones, a fatigue less physical and more spiritual. She longed for the quiet solitude of her lake house, a sanctuary earned through years of diligent work and frugal living, a stark contrast to the chaotic expectations of her family. The buzzing phone, vibrating against the pristine white counter in the break room, momentarily startled her. It was her father, Richard Vance. A familiar knot tightened in Eleanor's stomach. Richard's calls always heralded a request, a veiled criticism, or a thinly veiled attempt at manipulation, disguised beneath a veneer of booming charm. "Eleanor, my darling. How's my favorite hard-working daughter?" Richard's voice, a little too loud, a little too cheerful, grated on her frayed nerves. "Hi, Dad. I'm fine, just finished with a patient," she replied, bracing herself. "Wonderful, wonderful. Listen, I've got some marvelous news. Your brother, Liam, he's finally tying the knot. Can you believe it? 9 days, darling, 9 days." Eleanor blinked, her mind struggling to process the information. 9 days? Liam? Her brother, the perennial golden child who seemed to float through life on a cloud of inherited privilege and parental bailouts, was getting married in 9 days? Her brow furrowed. 9 days? Dad, that's quite soon. I haven't received an invitation. Richard chuckled, a dismissive, airy sound that sent a familiar chill down Eleanor's spine. "Oh, that pesky postal service. Always misplacing things. You know how it is, darling. Liam's been so busy, and Martha, bless her heart, she's been running around like a headless chicken with all the preparations. I'm sure it's just a delay. Don't you fret about it. Just mark your calendar for next Saturday. It's going to be a grand affair." A delay. Eleanor knew better. Her parents had a long-standing history of subtly excluding her from family decisions, of hinting that her independent life and her beloved lake house were somehow selfish deviations from the family path. The idea that such a significant event could be left to chance, or the vagaries of the mail, felt like a deliberate insult. Yet, years of conditioning, of trying to be the good daughter who didn't rock the boat, kicked in. "Of course, Dad," she said, forcing a cheerful note into her voice that felt like shattered glass in her throat. "That's wonderful news. I'll make sure to be there." After hanging up, a wave of familiar resentment washed over her. She pushed it down. She'd go, she'd buy an expensive gift, something to prove she cared, something to erase the invisible ledger of perceived slights. She chose a high-end coffee maker, rationalizing that Liam, despite his penchant for designer labels, probably hadn't bought one for himself. Days later, the unease gnawed at her. No follow-up calls, no texts from Martha about dress codes or seating arrangements. Driven by a desperate need for clarity, or perhaps a futile hope for inclusion, Eleanor called her mother. "Mom, I was wondering if you could give me some details about Liam's wedding," she began, trying to sound casual. "Like, what time is the ceremony, and is there a reception afterwards?" Awkward. Distant. Eleanor's mind raced. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, deliberate exclusion. They had planned it, executed it, and then gaslit her about it. The missing invitation wasn't a postal error, it was a non-existent one. She forced herself to ask, though she already knew the answer. So, no invitation was actually sent? A defeated sigh from Martha. Well, no. But darling, it was for the best, truly. You understand, don't you? Eleanor hung up, the phone feeling heavy and cold in her hand. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. Liam, her own brother, was complicit. He had stood by, allowed her to be erased from his biggest day, probably even agreed to it. The coffee maker, still in its pristine box on her counter, mocked her, a monument to her foolish attempts to appease a family that had no interest in truly including her, only in manipulating her. Her cherished lake house, often the target of their snide remarks, now felt like the only place in the world she truly belonged. The very next day, a call from Martha pierced the fragile peace Eleanor had begun to cultivate. Martha's voice, syrupy sweet, dripped with feigned warmth. Eleanor, darling, how are you? Listen, your father and I are off on our big anniversary trip, 2 glorious weeks in Tuscany. But there's a tiny, tiny favor. Eleanor braced herself. Martha always began with a tiny favor that inevitably snowballed into a monumental imposition. Liam and Clara, bless their hearts, their apartment needs fumigation. And you know how sensitive Clara is. We were thinking, since your lovely lake house is just sitting there, not really being used, they could stay there for the 2 weeks. Wouldn't that be just perfect? Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. The lake house. The very sanctuary they'd mocked for years as her hermitage, her escape from real life, her impractical folly. Now it was suddenly their convenient solution. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement, stole her breath. They hadn't wanted her at the wedding, but they felt perfectly within their rights to demand her cherished property. Before Eleanor could formulate a coherent response, Richard's voice, smoothly authoritative, cut in later that evening. Eleanor, your mother mentioned you're hesitating. Don't be petty, sweetheart. It's family. Liam needs this. Are you really going to hold a grudge over a silly misunderstanding when your own brother is in a bind? His tone was laced with that familiar disappointment, the subtle threat of withdrawal, the masterful use of guilt. We've always been there for you. This is about family loyalty, Eleanor. It's about being a Vance. Don't tell me you've forgotten what that means. The words hit her like a deluge of old wounds. Family loyalty, the phrase that had justified every sacrifice, every ignored boundary, every silent hurt she'd endured for decades. This wasn't loyalty, it was emotional extortion. For years, she had bent, stretched, and often broken herself trying to accommodate their endless needs and criticisms. But the wedding had been a deliberate act of cruelty, a calculated attempt to erase her, and now they expected her to open her most sacred space? A quiet, steel-like resolve solidified in her chest. This was it. The breaking point. No, Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly steady, devoid of the tremor she expected. Absolutely not. A beat of stunned silence from Richard's end. Eleanor, don't be ridiculous. This isn't a request. It's for Liam. Then Liam can find a hotel or stay with you. My house is not available. Each word was a brick in the wall Sarah had spoken of. Eleanor, you'll regret this, Richard hissed, the charming facade finally cracking. You'll regret alienating your family. I think I'll regret allowing myself to be manipulated any longer, Eleanor countered, her resolve hardening further. Without another word, she disconnected the call. Her finger hovered over his contact, then Martha's, and with a deep, shaky breath, she blocked both numbers. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was a profound, liberating stillness. She had made a definitive choice to prioritize her peace and her boundaries over their constant, insidious demands. The lake house was hers, and it would remain her sanctuary. The liberating stillness Eleanor had found was short-lived, replaced by a relentless buzzing from her phone. Liam. His texts came in rapid succession, a deluge of guilt and self-pity. Asterisk, can't believe you missed my wedding. Mom and Dad are furious. Asterisk followed by, asterisk, things are really tight after the wedding, Clara's family isn't helping. Maybe if you weren't so distant. Asterisk, the audacity stole her breath. He didn't just blame her for his parents' anger, he twisted the knife, implicating her in his supposed financial woes. The sheer nerve after they deliberately excluded her. Then Clara. Her messages were softer, laced with carefully chosen words. Eleanor, I'm so sorry about the misunderstanding with the wedding. Liam and I would truly love to connect. And then, the thinly veiled request. It would mean so much to him if we could use the cabin for a few days, just until the fumigation is done. It's been a really stressful time. Self-serving, every word. An apology that was merely a preamble to another demand. Eleanor stared at the screen, a cold resolve settling in her chest. She typed a single, unwavering response to both. Absolutely not. The family's collective gaslighting escalated. First, Aunt Beatrice, with her sickly sweet voice, Eleanor, darling, your mother is beside herself. Family comes first, you know. Just for a few days. Then, distant cousins and even a neighbor she barely knew, all parroting the same lines, woven with subtle threats of social ostracization. Each call was a fresh wave of manipulation, painting her as the unfeeling villain. Eleanor met each with a polite but firm refusal, her voice steady, her resolve hardening like obsidian. This wasn't about the cabin, it was about control, about seeing if she would finally break. The day her parents were set to leave for their anniversary trip, Martha appeared on Eleanor's doorstep. Her usually immaculate hair was slightly askew, her face blotchy, eyes red-rimmed. A theatrical display, carefully orchestrated. Eleanor, she wailed, clutching a designer handbag to her chest, please, you have to help us. Liam is desperate. The fumigation is already scheduled. The family is falling apart, darling. Your father is so stressed. She pressed a crumpled tissue to her nose, her voice thick with manufactured grief. Eleanor observed her mother with a clinical detachment. The act was flawless, perfected over decades. Mother, Eleanor said, her voice even, you could always cancel your trip. It's non-refundable, I know, but if Liam is truly desperate, you could host him at your house. Liam jumped, dropping the key. Eleanor. We just thought. Mom said it was okay. His eyes started nervously between Eleanor and the locked front door. Clara looked genuinely startled, a blush rising on her cheeks. Mom said it was okay? Eleanor scoffed. I own this property. You are trespassing. I'm giving you exactly 5 minutes to get back in your cars and leave, or I call the police. You can explain your mother's permission to them. She held up her phone, the red recording light an undeniable witness. Liam's face drained of color. Clara, usually composed, wrung her hands. Eleanor, please, we didn't mean any harm. Just a night, until we figure things out. 5 minutes, Eleanor repeated, her voice laced with steel. She watched as they exchanged a panicked glance, then scrambled back into their cars. The engine roared to life, and they sped off, leaving a cloud of dust and the lingering scent of their entitlement. Eleanor stood there, watching until they were out of sight, a profound sense of triumph and release washing over her. The line was drawn. Her boundary, finally, irrevocably solidified. The metallic clang of the old deadbolt being replaced with a new, reinforced one echoed through the quiet cabin. Eleanor worked with a focused intensity, each turn of the screwdriver a deliberate act of reclaiming her space. Liam and Clara's brazen attempt to enter had been a sharp, painful reminder that the boundary she'd drawn needed physical fortifications. Within hours, all locks were swapped out, heavier chains installed on the main door, and discreet surveillance cameras, purchased online and delivered discreetly to Sarah's house, were strategically positioned. She wired them herself, feeling a strange satisfaction in the meticulous task, a physical manifestation of her resolve. The next morning, a notification buzzed on her phone. Her stomach clenched. It was a motion alert from the lake house's front porch camera. Eleanor tapped the screen, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing sheepishly before the newly installed deadbolt, was Liam. He tried the knob, then tested the window beside it, a flicker of irritation crossing his face when he found it locked. He lingered for a moment, shoulders slumped, before slowly descending the steps and disappearing from view. The footage solidified Eleanor's decision, turning any lingering guilt into grim validation. Her family wouldn't respect a verbal no, they required an impenetrable fortress. A week later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at her apartment, bearing the return address of Reynolds and Associates LLP. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she opened it. The letter, formal and accusatory, stated that her parents, Richard and Martha Vance, claimed a long-standing verbal agreement for unfettered family access to the lake house, an agreement they alleged Eleanor was now maliciously and wrongfully breaching. It threatened immediate legal action if she did not restore their access within 7 days. The audacity of it stole her breath. A verbal agreement for a property she had bought and maintained herself? It was a transparent, desperate bluff. Without hesitation, Eleanor called Bethany, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer she'd met through Sarah's professional network. Bethany listened calmly, occasionally interjecting with a clipped or I see. When Eleanor finished, Bethany's voice was dry. Eleanor, this is boilerplate harassment. There's no legal basis for a verbal agreement regarding real property ownership and access. Unless they have a signed, notarized document, which I highly doubt, this is just them trying to scare you. A paper tiger. She chuckled. I'll draft a cease and desist letter with a clear warning against trespassing and frivolous litigation. They'll back off. True to her word, Bethany's letter, a masterclass in legal formality mixed with thinly veiled threat, was dispatched. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. No more calls, no more texts, no more legal threats. Months slipped by, each one bringing Eleanor a deeper sense of peace. The lake house became her true sanctuary, a place where the air felt lighter, and the weight of her family's expectations couldn't reach her. Weekends were spent reading by the water, tending to a small herb garden, or simply watching the sunlight dapple through the trees. Sarah was a frequent visitor, a steadfast presence who celebrated Eleanor's newfound liberation. They'd sit on the porch, sipping wine, and share stories, Eleanor's almost entirely free of the toxic family narratives that once consumed her. One blustery autumn evening, Sarah was recounting a particularly absurd story from her law office. You wouldn't believe it, Eleanor, she said, shaking her head. This couple, apparently in deep financial trouble, tried to sell their house by including their daughter's cabin in the listing. Claimed it was family property with an implicit agreement for them to use it as collateral. The daughter found out, of course, blew the whistle, and the whole sale fell through. Fraud, plain and simple. Eleanor froze, the wine glass halfway to her lips. An icy tendril of dread snaked through her. Wait, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Did you say they tried to include their daughter's cabin in their listing? Sarah nodded, oblivious to the shift in Eleanor's demeanor. Yeah, crazy, right? The real estate agent was furious. Said it was a desperate, stupid move. Eleanor felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. It couldn't be. Could it? Her parents had always been manipulative, but this felt like a new low, a new layer of calculated malice. The pieces began to click into place. Their sudden, urgent need for the cabin, Martha's desperate plea about Liam's living situation, their attempt to sell their house, and then the baseless legal threat. It was all connected. The next morning, Eleanor, heart-pounding, drove to the county records office. She requested public records for her parents' property, a stately, two-large house in a desirable neighborhood, and cross-referenced them with the property deeds for her own lake house. What she found was a cold, infuriating confirmation of her worst fears. There, buried within the complex jargon of property filings, were undeniable clues. During a recent refinancing attempt, and later a preliminary listing with a new real estate agent after their first attempt failed, her parents had indeed, whether through direct misrepresentation or strategic ambiguity, included the lake house as part of their assets to artificially inflate the apparent value of their home. It was a desperate gambit to secure a higher sale price or a larger loan, using her property as collateral without her knowledge or consent. This fraudulent inflation had been exposed by diligent due diligence on the part of potential buyers and their lenders, leading to multiple failed sales and significant financial penalties for her parents. The house, currently still on the market, had been drastically reduced in price, yet still languished. Eleanor stared at the documents, a cold fury settling deep within her. It wasn't just about disrespecting her boundaries or excluding her from a wedding. It was about outright fraud, a blatant attempt to exploit her property for their own reckless financial gain. The depth of their deception was staggering. They weren't just self-centered, they were financially desperate and morally bankrupt. This wasn't merely a family squabble, it was a criminal act. The peace she'd found was suddenly punctured, replaced by a steely resolve. Her family had not just stepped over the line, they had tried to erase it entirely. And now she had the proof. The phone rang, shrill and insistent, slicing through the afternoon quiet of Eleanor's cabin. She knew it was Liam even before she saw the number, a tightening in her chest, a familiar prelude to his chaos. "What the hell, Eleanor? Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice was a raw, unfiltered shriek of fury, utterly devoid of the calculated calm her parents usually maintained. Eleanor leaned against the kitchen counter, taking a deep breath. "What are you talking about, Liam?" she asked, her voice steady, a stark contrast to his hysteria. "Don't play dumb. Mom and Dad can't sell the house. The buyers pulled out because of what you told them. They're saying it's fraud. Are you out of your mind? You're ruining everything." His accusations came in a torrent, each word a desperate attempt to deflect blame. "Liam," Eleanor said, her tone firm, "Mom and Dad misrepresented the property. They tried to include my cabin in their sale to inflate the value. That's not what I told anyone, that's what they did. It's a matter of public record. They committed fraud. I am not going to cover for their deceit." A stunned silence stretched between them, heavier than any of his previous rants. She could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the slow, painful realization dawning that his sister, the perennial fixer, the easy scapegoat, was no longer playing the part. He'd never had to face real consequences, always protected by their parents, but now Eleanor had stepped out of the shadow. You can't just," he stammered, his bluster deflating. But before he could construct another argument, a click echoed, and the line went dead. Liam had hung up, not out of victory, but out of a sudden, chilling understanding that Eleanor was no longer a pawn in their elaborate, dysfunctional game. Months bled into a peaceful stretch. Eleanor spent her days at the cabin, working remotely when she could, finding solace in the rhythmic lapping of the lake against the shore. The quiet was a balm to her soul, a stark contrast to the years of emotional warfare. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, a car pulled up her winding driveway. It wasn't one she recognized, nor did the figure emerging from it immediately register. But as the woman approached, Eleanor's breath caught. Clara Hayes, Liam's wife. Or, as Eleanor now instinctively felt, Liam's soon-to-be ex-wife. Clara looked worn, her usual pleasant demeanor etched with a deep weariness. She carried a large envelope clasped tightly in her hands. "Eleanor," she began, her voice small, almost swallowed by the breeze. I know this is out of the blue. I'm so sorry to just show up." Eleanor, guarded but curious, simply nodded, inviting her onto the porch with a silent gesture. Clara sank onto the swing, her gaze sweeping across the tranquil lake. "I'm divorcing Liam," she blurted out, the words a dam breaking. I can't do it anymore. The constant drama, the debt, his parents pulling his strings, pulling my strings. It's a sickness. I tried to make it work, but after everything, after seeing how they treated you, how they gaslight me about the wedding, how they just expect everyone to clean up their messes." She trailed off, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I want to apologize, Eleanor. Truly. For not standing up to them, for going along with it, for not reaching out sooner. I was so caught up in the illusion." Eleanor watched her, a flicker of empathy softening her resolve. "It's a powerful illusion," she conceded gently. Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. "It is. And they're deep in it. I wanted to give you this." She held out the envelope. These are confidential financial documents. Things I've found, things I've pieced together. Their debt, a second mortgage they took out for our wedding, which Liam blew through, of course. Their desperation to sell the house wasn't just about moving, it's about avoiding foreclosure. They're underwater, Eleanor. And they're still trying to blame you. Eleanor took the envelope, her fingers brushing Clara's. The weight of it was substantial, a tangible representation of the tangled web her family had woven. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore, it was about an entire lifetime of calculated manipulation, a house of cards built on other people's sacrifices. The full extent of her parents' deceit, their financial recklessness, and the lengths they would go to maintain their facade, suddenly snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. A few days later, Eleanor received a call from Pastor Alastair, the head of her parents' church. He spoke with a practiced warmth, explaining that Richard and Martha had approached him, deeply distressed, hoping he could mediate a family misunderstanding and bring Eleanor back into the fold. He suggested meeting at the church. Eleanor agreed, but with a plan. She arrived with a briefcase. Pastor Alastair, a man known for his gentle wisdom and community standing, greeted her with a sympathetic smile. Eleanor, your parents are very troubled. They truly believe you're being unfair, holding a grudge. Family is so important. Eleanor opened her briefcase. Pastor Alastair, she began, her voice calm and firm. I respect your role and your desire for peace. But this isn't a misunderstanding. This is a pattern of calculated deception and manipulation. She laid out the stack of documents, her lawyer's letters detailing the trespassing, the property records confirming her sole ownership, the evidence of her parents attempting to fraudulently include her cabin in their home's sale, the security camera footage of Liam attempting to break in, and finally, Clara's financial revelations, the crushing debt, the second mortgage, the looming foreclosure. Each document, each piece of evidence, painted a damning picture. Pastor Alastair's kind smile slowly dissolved. His eyes, initially filled with practiced empathy, widened with disbelief, then settled into a horrified disbelief. He picked up one document, then another, his face paling as he absorbed the sheer weight of the evidence. He looked up at Eleanor, a profound sadness in his eyes. Eleanor, he said, his voice barely a whisper, I had no idea. This is deeply disturbing. I cannot, in good conscience, support their request. I will speak with them, but my advice will be for them to seek professional counseling and to face the truth of their actions. He looked at the stack of evidence on the table, then back at Eleanor, a silent apology in his gaze for having initially believed her parents' narrative. The reckoning had begun. The repercussions of Pastor Alastair's intervention spread swiftly through the community, a quiet wildfire of truth. Those who had previously pressured Eleanor, subtly and overtly, now approached her with apologies. Mrs. Henderson, once tearful about family unity, now confessed shame. Eleanor, my dear, I am so truly sorry, she whispered, having grasped the Vance family's profound deceit. This wave of belated understanding, of having her truth finally seen and validated, lifted a significant weight from Eleanor's shoulders. It was a quiet, profound validation, justice finally served. Meanwhile, the Vance family's carefully constructed facade shattered. Their house, now tainted by public knowledge of their fraudulent property claims, sold for a drastically reduced price. With minimal funds remaining after substantial debts, Richard and Martha Vance lost their last vestiges of comfort. Their dream of a luxurious downsize evaporated, replaced by a cramped, two-bedroom apartment, ironically, near Liam, their golden boy. Liam, reeling from Clara's decisive divorce, was a diminished figure. Without his parents' constant financial bailouts or Clara's stabilizing presence, he floundered utterly. The small apartment near his parents was a grim necessity. His once charming irresponsibility morphed into bitter, unending complaints and endless excuses, his dependency on his parents becoming even more pronounced. He vehemently blamed Eleanor for his misfortunes and for the family's fall. Richard and Martha, confined within their new, diminished reality, clung fiercely to their manufactured narrative. "It's Eleanor's fault," Martha would lament to the few who still tolerated their company, her voice thin with self-pity, while Richard echoed her. They blamed her for everything: the house sale, Liam's struggles, their reduced circumstances, the church whispers. But their credibility was irrevocably shattered. Eleanor's evidence, Pastor Alastair's counsel, and the spread of truth rendered their accusations hollow. Friends and acquaintances began to distance themselves, isolating the couple. Liam, despite his parents' relentless accusations against Eleanor, gradually faced the crushing consequences of his own choices. Stripped of the family safety net, he was forced to fend for himself. He took on thankless odd jobs, his hands growing calloused. His entrenched self-pity slowly gave way to a grudging, if still resentful, confrontation with his own deep-seated irresponsibility. The stark realization dawned on him, unwelcome, that his comfortable life had been built on a fragile foundation he had never contributed to. Eleanor, at her beloved lake house, found a profound, unshakable peace. Each sunrise over the shimmering water, each quiet evening by the hearth, was a daily testament to her hard-won freedom. There was no vengeful glee, only a steady, quiet satisfaction. She observed the natural, inevitable consequences unfolding for the Vance family from a serene distance, feeling a deep sense of vindication. This was not her revenge, it was simply justice, meticulously self-served by their own choices. She reflected on her arduous journey, understanding that the most powerful act was simply to refuse to be used, to protect her sacred boundaries, and to allow the truth to illuminate all. Her lake house, once a source of contention, now stood as an unwavering symbol of her fierce independence, her earned peace, and her complete, joyful liberation from their toxic influence. It was, finally and unequivocally, her true home.